Let's look at the first example in mid lane. This is going to be Syndra versus Neeko. And I'm going to be talking primarily two ideas under the very important concept of spacing, which is one of the few fundamentals of the game, which is going to be really crucial for you to begin to understand as a player. And you'll become more and more competent in lane as you master these ideas and concepts. So the first thing I want to talk to you about is lane opening in respects to how you should space. The second concept I want you to be aware about is the awareness of high ground when an opposing player uses an ability. Okay, so now in this case we have Neeko positioning from the south side of the lane, which means that now let's hypothetically say Neeko stands in position A. So if we call this position A, then Neeko has her ability to Q all of this area of the lane, which means that all of this area is essentially danger zone to stand in. Now, if Neeko advances up and moves to position B, okay, if she moves to position B, then again, her ability to Q increases. However, a trade that's extended in respects to auto attacks will lead the three casters to hit her. This is something that you want to be aware of, but not completely. Let's forget about the casters for now. Let's just worry about the fact that we can change our range from A to B by moving up and down. We can change the range of our ability. And this is very important because you're going to understand that this is really like a game of Street Fighter when it comes to spacing. And so now what Syndra is going to do is she's going to essentially be on the edge of where Neeko could stand with her Q, or where her Q could be placed. Likewise, Syndra wants to work on these minions. These minions is priority 1. Hitting the Neeko is priority 2. It's not a problem right now. This is the first objective. We must get a slight push lead into the Neeko. So now Neeko uses Q, and now after the Q goes down, so again, notice where Knight is actually standing. He's away from the Neeko Q. He also ends up right. So in this case, let's say Neeko stands from position A and Syndra's in position B. Well, if this is the case, Syndra could move up and down and get Neeko to try to use Q on her. You're baiting the guy to use an ability. When the ability is used, then you move up and you advance. So in this case, the first concept was lane opening, which is we see Neeko from the south side, and so because she's standing here, we stand away. Now, if this was a champion like Zed, maybe we can stand here, try to get him to Q us by using the wall, and then when he uses Q, we move up. But as Neeko, if Neeko uses Q and walks away, we may not have Q range, and hence we stand away. Okay. Now the second concept, again, when I talk about advancement, is notice carefully. Now here it's actually not going to happen, and I'll tell you why it doesn't happen. So Neeko just used a Q, but why does Syndra not move up? You see how he just stays still and continues to auto the minions? Well, now, when Neeko stands in A, Neeko essentially has threat all across this region of the lane. Now, when the ability is gone, this threat is gone too. Which means that now Syndra, by standing in A, which I'll use a better... Syndra standing in A, has now a threat of using Q, which is again, this is her threat for Q. At which case now Neeko has to space away. Again, by moving from point A and advancing into point B, we're changing the threat range. And by changing the threat range, you can force the opposing player back. By forcing the opposing player back, you have priority on what you want to do with the wave in comparison to them. This is in some cases, okay? This is relative to champion, but I'm giving you the dead basics here. So now Neeko just used an ability, but because Syndra ended up using an ability as well, as you can see, she used an ability, she can't advance forward because both champions are down an ability. And if Syndra walks up to try to attack Neeko, well then these three casters jump on Syndra and it's a losing trade. Now, let's say, hypothetically, what could actually happen, and how do we advance forward? When Neeko uses Q, had Syndra layered the frontline minions better, we would have Q and we wouldn't have to use an ability in order to get the extra minion. Notice the frontline casters. Notice how one auto came here, one auto came here. Unfortunately, what ended up happening in the lane is both of these minions are going to die at the same time, and Syndra can only attack one, hence she uses Q. Now, if we were able to auto attack these minions, and lastly, of course, this one as well eventually, in a way where we don't have to Q, we now have that Q range, and therefore now Syndra can advance from point A to point B, forcing Neeko back. So, two concepts were discussed in this idea of spacing, this fundamental awareness of what spacing is, which is such a crucial thing to have when getting better at the game. The first is lane opening. How do we open? And we want to open based upon the champion who has the highest ranged ability. I mentioned the ADC example where Ashe volley will outrange Vayne, for example. This is a very exaggerated example, and therefore Vayne has to approach the lane in a defensive manner, and Ashe can take certain pockets that Vayne otherwise couldn't. You substitute these champions, you substitute their highest ranged ability, therefore the pockets and the way the lane is open changes. Likewise, in the example of mid lane, Neeko uses an ability. If we have the ability up and the opposing player doesn't, we now have higher ground against the opposing player, therefore we can now advance up and well, exercise our authority.